Political analyst James Boyce joins us from London to offer his perspective on how this might play out. I want to begin, though, with this revealing leak that shows very little respect from the UK ambassador for President Trump. What do you make of it?
Well, good morning, Natalie. It's remarkable, isn't it? Not only the fact that these materials have been leaked, but also the content of them. Quite frankly, when you actually go through what it was that Sir Kim has written in these memos, they read very much like some of the contents from people like Michael Wolff's books, for example. So with regard to the content, the surprising thing there, I think, is how similar they are to reports which have come out from former members of the White House and the administration, but the tone and the actual content of them is particularly undiplomatic. Of course, as the Foreign Office was rightly saying in its release this morning, we would want and expect all diplomats to offer the unvarnished truth and perspective about foreign administrations. But clearly it's embarrassing that this material has gotten out. I would point out, however, that the reason these things were written from the reporting in the papers this morning was very much in an attempt to try to advise the administration here in London about how to improve and to secure better relationships with Donald Trump, talking about flattering him, flooding the zone of his advisors, making sure that Theresa May and Donald Trump spoke a lot, how best to deal with Donald Trump on a human level. So, of course, the irony in this is that these documents, which were prepared very much in an attempt to improve relationships, and their revelation, I think, could very much hinder things moving forward in the short term.
Right, could create a chasm there between these two allies, and it certainly does indicate, according to this ambassador, the complexities of working with this current White House. But what about as far as President Trump and the way he appears on the world stage? How much weight will this one ambassador's words carry?
Well, I think it's notable that it is the British ambassador to Washington who is stating these issues. Of course, the United States has many allies. We like to think here in London that we are a particularly key, important ally. A special relationship is an expression which is often used time and time again. I think what's of note, however, is the fact that, as your reporting indicated, we are about to go through a change in administration here in Washington, in London. The extent to which this ambassador may or may not remain in post under a new British Prime Minister, presumably at this point one must imagine that will be Boris Johnson, is perhaps up in the air. It might well be an opportunity to rotate Sir Kim out and to put a new man in. That is something which could occur. But I think one must also recognise that there is another side to these cables, which is a realistic appraisal of where Donald Trump is. And as Sir Kim had noted, don't count him out. There is still a path to re-election. And when you consider the state of the economy, you look at some of the reporting in the Washington Post this morning, for example, it's very, very clear that the current polling for this administration is such that any efforts to try to suggest that this will be a one-term administration, I think, would be a mistake at this point.
Right, that poll indicating that his numbers went up, favorability due to the economy and the perception of how he's managing it. But 6 in 10 polled says he's acted unpresidential since coming to office. We'll wait and see which matters most, the economy or the president's behavior. But I want to ask you about what's going on in the campaign trail as well. Democratic candidates continuing to pounce. We saw Kamala Harris talking about the president's predatory behaviors. And we also heard this from Democratic frontrunner Joe Biden. Let's listen.
I'm looking forward to this, man. You walk behind me in a debate. Come here, man. No, you think you know me too well. I mean, the idea that I'd be intimidated by Donald Trump, he's the bully that I knew my whole life. He's the bully that I've always stood up to. He's the bully I used to make fun when I was a kid in a stutter and I'd smack them in the mouth.
Well, Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, that will be an interesting one. They've already tried to attack each other before, and looks like they're going to do that again. But will these attacks resonate with American voters?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Sir Kim's memos there are talking about unpresidential activity and behavior, etc., and the Washington Post poll brings that out. You have to wonder whether there's an extent to which his opponents are beginning to almost come down to Donald Trump's level there, talking about predatory behavior, talking about duking it out, almost having a fist fight with the president. You know, if we want to talk about raising the game here, it's on everybody's responsibilities to do so. Those pollings and everything that's going to come out of the campaign are all going to come down to something that Ronald Reagan famously said several decades ago, which is, you know, how are you doing better than you were 4 years ago? And one of the benefits that Donald Trump has going for him, which I think the Democrats are going to be struggling to overcome, is the improving nature of the American economy. Time and again, we see elections in many countries turning upon pocketbook issues. And if Donald Trump can make this about the economy, about the state of the American family and how they may or may not be doing financially, I think he's potentially better placed than many people expect. And when we think about the state of Joe Biden, of course, I'm reminded constantly of John Kerry in 2004. The idea that he had a long, distinguished career in the Senate necessarily, but that voting record will be used against Biden just as it was used against Kerry in devastating effect, I think. So it will be fascinating to see whether Biden can overcome the challenges by his own Democratic candidates long before he ever gets a chance to run against President Trump in the general election.
Absolutely. James Boys, we always appreciate your insights. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Natalie.